Spring game in the books. Do you have a starting quarterback? All right. Ryan Day doesn't, at least that he has made public. We're talking Ohio State football, of course. Steve Hillwagon from Bucknuts 247 Sports, Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, and of course, Kevin Noon from Rivals Buckeye Grove. How are we doing today, boys?
Good.
Doing great.
Good. All right. So we saw the tackling was at its finest, if nothing else. I think the tackling, I didn't see a missed tackle out there. There was no question about that. All right, Steve, everybody's going to ask before I even open up the live chat, and I'm going to let everyone know, leave your comments, your questions. Everyone's going to be asking some form of who's the starting quarterback, who looked the best, who does Ryan Day think is going to be the starter, and has he already made that decision, even though he's not telling? There's going to be all those questions. So quarterback situation, Steve, you attack it in any direction you'd like.
I thought it was great to see all three of those guys in action, and I think all three of them had some great moments in the course of the spring game. I think that Stroud threw for 185 yards and McCord threw for 184, if my math was correct, and both of them threw for two touchdowns. Jack Miller was around 125 yards and had an interception. So there'll be a lot of people who take the ball and run with based off those stats and what they saw and how sharp the guys looked. They all threw for pretty good percentages. I think what we have to remember, though, is it was just 1 out of 15 practices for Ohio State during the spring, and we have no idea how they performed the other 14 days. I mean, I think you have a pretty good idea that – a decent enough idea to know what they're capable of from watching them play in that game. And I was very impressed, really, with all three of them. I think Stroud and McCord in particular, there were very few negative plays, I think, for those two. Obviously, Miller throws the interception down on the goal line, which kind of put a crimp on his day, you would think, a little bit. But perhaps he was the best one the other 13 or 14 days. You just don't know because you don't go there. And Coach Day didn't announce a starter, didn't declare one ahead of the other. We haven't really talked to Corey Dennis, the quarterback's coach, at all yet to get his feel for how they played this spring. So I guess just basing it off what we saw, if it had to be Stroud or had to be McCord, you have to at least feel, hey, that's okay. I don't think either of them or any of those three are ready to go play Alabama or Clemson just yet. But the good news is they wouldn't have to play a team of that caliber till later on if that's what it comes down to. So they can kind of, I wouldn't even say ease into it because they're playing Minnesota and Oregon the first two games. But I think feel a little bit better about where things are headed with the quarterback position after you have a chance to see them each throw about 20, 25 passes in that game. It was a pass-heavy scrimmage, and they really accentuated what the young quarterbacks could do. So that was my take. Tony, I know you're up next. What were your thoughts about it?
Well, you say we didn't really talk to Corey Dennis. What you meant to say is we absolutely did not get to talk to Corey Dennis this spring. And we didn't talk to any of the quarterbacks. They're the only position group we didn't talk to this spring for whatever reason. Who knows? Who's to say really why we didn't get a chance to talk to them? But I'm with Steve. I thought C.J. Stroud and Kyle McCord. I love the aggression that they showed, and that's what disappointed me with Jack Miller is that he didn't show some of that same aggression. But he may not have had that opportunity. He also had some drops, and everybody's going to remember the one interception. But as Ryan Day has said, each week, each day, it would be a different guy shining and struggling. And one day somebody would take a step forward, and the next day they'd take a step back. And so this is one of those days where it was somebody step forward and somebody step back maybe. And I don't even know that there's necessarily a step back for any of them. We've seen much worse spring performances, spring game performances, including the last spring game we watched where Justin Fields was a pitiful 4 of 13. So I'd say all three of these guys are on pace to be better than Justin Fields. I mean, if we're going to put so much weight on a spring game, or not us, but if people want to, then just go ahead and jump in with both feet. I mean, these guys are better than Justin Fields based on this one spring game. If you're going to say this guy's ahead because of what you saw, you got to commit to it, man. Kevin, are you committing?
No, I'm not committed. I'm gonna let you two sit there and talk about all that, and I'm gonna just say Ohio State certainly has 3 quarterbacks, if not 4, as the walk-on quarterback throws a touchdown at the end of the game, and all hail our quarterback overlords, whoever it may be. I'm not ready to jump in on anything at this point, as as both Steve and Tony said. We've seen a very small window of what's gone on. We certainly were isolated away from talking to the quarterbacks or the quarterback coach. And whenever we asked Ryan Day anything, he just confirmed that the team had quarterbacks out there working. So we really don't know what practice 9 or practice 11 or practice 13 looked like. We know what practice 15 looked like. It's not me. So, we don't know. I mean, Jack Miller was picked off by Ryan Watts. Watts did a good job of walling off his defender, and, Miller would have been better suited to go a little bit more back shoulder there, but there was not a lot of real estate. But what I do have faith in is that they will figure it out. They're not going to roll out there without a quarterback when they open against Minnesota, but I guess if you put my feet to the fire, I would say that, in the bits and pieces and drips and drabs I've seen, C.J. Stroud seems to be in front, but, the margin, I'm not sure.
I think it's pretty safe to say that through all this, the one thing that we can conclude that after 15 years that Michigan has finally pulled ahead of Ohio State because they were able to name a starting quarterback. Cade McNamara has been named the starter. So they clearly know what they're doing up there, as opposed to Ohio State and Ryan Day still trying to figure things out, I guess.
Yeah, you know what you're doing when your quarterback transfers out to go. One of your quarterbacks does to lead that flaming dumpster that is known as the Tennessee Volunteers, Joe Milton.
He goes from the Michigan of the Big Ten to the Michigan of the SEC. There's some comfort level, some familiarity there for Joe Milton, and he'll be right back on track. And I believe Michigan will start 3 quarterbacks this year. Cade McNamara will start out, and he'll struggle at some point. JJ McCarthy will come in and just do what McNamara did last year, like where he comes in for a half to rescue the team, and he looks good, so he starts the next week, gets about 2 starts, gets hurt, and then it goes to Alan Bowman, the Texas Tech transfer. He'll get a few starts in there before he finally gives way back to Cade McNamara, and you've got this perfect circle of 7 and 5 of quarterbacking.
The sun goes up, the sun goes down.
I guess Michigan and Tennessee, in addition to being in that rare category of 100,000 seat stadiums across college football, would be maybe in the only category, just the 2 of them of 100,000 that are disgruntled and booing every week. They have the monopoly on that. All right, talking Ohio State football here every week. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, Kevin Noon from Rivals, Buckeye Grove, and of course 247 Sports. Buck Nuts, repped by one Steve Hellwagon. All right, we're talking Ohio State football, taking your comments and questions. All right, my one thought on the quarterback situation would be, again, too much of a spotlight on the spring game. It's the one time that the cameras are set up. Otherwise, it's no more important than 3 to 4 other times that they go full throttle scrimmage. But is it safe to say that McCord's got the best arm, but Stroud probably has the best grasp of the offense and looks the most prepared and polished to play a game tomorrow?
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
Fair way to say it. I think McCord, first play went down the middle, 55 yards to Garrett Wilson, and that was a lot of fun. Each of the guys got a chance to throw a deep ball early in the game, which was kind of a way to kind of get their juices flowing, I guess, and they hit a few of those, which were kind of cool as well, to the big timers there with Garrett Wilson and Jackson Smith, the Jigba, and Chris Olave, and they got out early and often, so that was cool. A lot of guys making plays for the first time ever, that we got a chance to see them. I mean, very, very few practices are open, very few opportunities to see the team in an 11-on-11 situation. And again, you have to take a lot of what we saw with a grain of salt, because it seemed like the defense was very vanilla. It seemed like there weren't many blitzes. It was just kind of a controlled scrimmage. And again, I think the quarterbacks did a good job of taking advantage of what was there for them in the course of this game. Had a lot of young guys in coverage. A guy like Demario McCall, who's never played defense before, really at this level, out there trying to hang with Chris Olave and the others, and that didn't work out so well for him at times. Yeah. So, at any rate, I'm of a mind again. Take it, file it away, and understand that there's a lot more work that needs to be done before this team's ready to play Minnesota, Oregon, or anybody in the fall.
I don't know that the play that I'm thinking of when McCall was downfield against Olave wasn't pretty much played as most cornerbacks in the Big Ten would have played it. He was down there, at least. He was on him. He was close, but just couldn't find the football.
Yeah, that's kind of the way it is. And Olave and Wilson, I mean, they haven't backed off the throttle one iota. They look like they're ready to have some kind of a huge final season, I presume, for both of them at Ohio State coming up. And again, we'll get into it, but to play the freshmen as well, like Buca and Harrison, really gives you a lot of excitement for the future. I mean, if Stroud or McCord or Miller, and then Buca and Harrison are all they're chalked up to be. I mean, this is going to be Justin Field to Olave and Wilson all over again. So should be a lot of fun the next several years watching all these guys play.
Tony seems to be the official bookkeeper on spring game statistics. So I believe Jack Sawyer racked up a total of 3 sacks. They were pretty violent plays, too. I hope I was glad to see nobody got hurt, but Sawyer with 3 sacks in the game. Zach Harrison, of course. So David Greenshield asking for a prediction between who's going to get more snaps. Zach Harrison, he's already putting Jack Sawyer, and why not? I don't know that he's going to play quite as much as Zach Harrison. That would be my initial thought, Kevin.
Yeah, I mean, you just don't know, but I think it's a matter of, as you go through the year, those that are making the plays are going to see the snaps. But Larry Johnson has done a good job of trying to minimize the number that anybody really is out there getting. And we use snap counts with from Professional or Pro Football Focus, PFF, and it was there weren't a lot of games where ends were seeing more than 40 snaps in a game. So I think there could be a lot of games where one's getting 35 and one is getting 32 or whatever. I'm not going to allow myself to go too far down the rabbit hole based on what we saw out of the spring game there. When you remember, in a lot of instances, at least in the first half, you're splitting the offensive line. So, it's not like Jack Sawyer is going against Ohio State's first team line, and then you throw into the mix some guys that just didn't see a lot of action or didn't see any action or whatnot. But there's certainly a lot to be excited by Jack. But, I think a lot of Ohio State's success this year is going to be predicated on Zach Harrison having a big year. So, while there's the excitement about true freshman Jack Sawyer coming in, if we want to separate this from being a really good team and being a great team, I think a lot of people better hope that it's Zach Harrison that's getting those snaps, as somebody who's been in the program several years, and him being able to step in and be that guy that's the disruptor.
Yeah, I would add that I think it's going to be Zach Harrison who has more snaps. However, you go back to 2017 when Chase Young was a true freshman and was like the fifth or sixth defensive end with Jonathan Cooper. I think after about 4 or 5 games, he was leading them in snaps just because they had so many blowouts. Outside of the Oklahoma game, there was, UNLV and games like that where he got more snaps just because there was no need to put Nick Bosa out there or Sam Hubbard and those guys, so that they gave them some rest. So you may see some of that. I still think even Larry Johnson said it this spring that your starters are Tyreek Smith and Zach Harrison, and he called Javonte Jean-Baptiste and Tyler Friday the backups. And I think everybody was impressed by what Jack Sawyer did, but it was against Grant Toutant, and who's a redshirt freshman, and Zen Mahalski, who's a true freshman. I even think maybe there's a walk-on in there. So while he did what you wanted him to do, it's reminiscent of past games by like Solomon Thomas and when 2008 or whatever, when he had 7 or 8 sacks in a spring game or a jersey scrimmage because it's 2-hand touch. But at least a couple of those were like legitimate sacks. One, he knocked the ball down. Another one, he just pushed, I think, maybe Enoch Vamahi into the quarterback and got him there. But as I rewatched it on Sunday or Monday, like they could have credited him with 5 or 6 sacks, and they didn't. So there was, maybe that's the Ohio State SID, Sports Information Department, like just slowing things down, like Jim Tressel did in 2002 when Maurice Clarett could have opened the season with 6 touchdowns, but Jim Tressel would pull him out and let Lydell Ross score at the end of each drive.
Big Vinay's here with a question coming in and a super chat. Thank you so much for that, Vinay. Curious to get your thoughts on the performance of Taraja Mitchell. What held him back from starting sooner? He plays assertive, Tony.
Well, what's held him back is he's been behind Malik Harrison and Joe Burrow at the will linebacker, and they've preferred to have Dallas Gant as the backup middle linebacker. And no matter how many linebackers they have, Joe Burrow. Did I say Joe Burrow? I meant Pete Werner. Where did that come from? So I don't know. They remind me of each other. Very both the good athletic quarterbacks.
I thought I missed something there.
But Pete Werner and Malik Harrison. So you're behind those guys, and then Tuff Borland is nobody has ever been able to unseat him. So just because Taraja Mitchell couldn't, even though he didn't really even play middle linebacker. So I think what's held him back is he signed with Ohio State at essentially the very wrong time. Like Malik Harrison was just coming into his own, and then Pete Werner gets moved there last year, and he's just sitting there and waiting and just behind 2 NFL linebackers. So it's an unfortunate, just bad timing. Like some guys are right place, right time, like Jerome Baker. I think Taraja Mitchell was wrong place, wrong time, but now he has a year to make up for that, and then even a second year if he really, really wants it.
Yeah, I agree with what Tony said. Kind of a tough situation, a numbers game that they've had there the last few years, and we're bound and determined to play those upperclassmen. And now Mitchell getting his chance, and I thought he played pretty well in the limited number of snaps he had in the game on Saturday. Remains to be seen if they're going to go with this 4-2-5 or 4-3 or what it is they're going to go with. But I guess my feeling is I'll probably be more of a 4-3 in the fall, but we'll see when we get there, I guess. I think both schemes have their advantages, and could be a case against a team that you expect to line up and run the football with the power game. Maybe you'll run more of the 4-3, and if it's more of a spread team that's going to throw the ball 40 times, then it would be the 4-2-5. But I guess we'll have to wait and see again how it shakes out in the fall.
Yeah, I'll jump in and say that I really didn't pay a lot of attention to the linebackers in a thud game where there's not really a lot of running. There were a couple of hits in there on running backs. I remember one in particular where it was a high tackle on Trevion Henderson, but there was not a ton of we're going to let this thing percolate and nearly take them down to the ground or anything to where I think you could really make any assessment of what linebackers did. And I watched the spring game 2 or 3 times, and I tried to watch, for the sake of watching the front 7. And, I came away with the same belief each time. It's like, we don't really know anything about linebacker that we didn't know going in just because of the format of the game. And I'm okay with that at this point, because that they had 14 other practices to where they were able to do stuff, where they were able to judge where the linebackers are. So, to Vinay's point, I think that Taraja Mitchell certainly has the opportunity this year. To Tony's point, he was absolutely here at the wrong time as he got behind 2 guys. If you're the 5th best linebacker and then the 3rd best linebacker or whatever, and you just can't get the guy that's ahead of you on the depth chart is above you, and you just can't get by him, it kind of is what it is. But I know everybody's really been ready for this Mitchell, Pope, Gant class to get out there. It was a much ballyhooed linebacker class, and they just really have not been able to get out on the field. But I think that goes to speak for what Borland, Werner, Browning, and Hilliard were able to do down the stretch.
And Burrow.
And
Yeah, that Burrow, he's a great one.
Mark Swick, not to be confused with Justin Swick, with a comment about the special teams, Steve. So what I used to like about the Urban Meyer approach was you miss a field goal from 30, maybe even if you make the field goal from 30, he backs it up to 35, he backs it up to 40. You're out there to practice. I always liked the kick it again, let's back it up, let's kick it again. And there was a bad miss to the left, and I was waiting for Ryan Day to tee it back up.
Yeah, I don't get too worried about it. First of all, it was a little bit of a swirly, windy day there on Saturday, and that isn't to say, of course, it won't be in the fall because it's the same stadium where they're going to play, and the wind would be, fall wind as opposed to April spring wind. But I think the other thing to think about is when you're in the fall, the kickers practice obviously all summer long, then 4 weeks, preseason camp, and then 6 days a week. And during the spring, they're only getting out there a couple, 2-3 days a week during spring practice. So they may not be quite as a groove per se as they would be when they're practicing 5-6 days a week during the fall. So I don't worry too much about it. Seibert showed last year that he's got great ability kicking the football, and I'm not too worried about him if it comes down to field goals. And honestly, it's rare that an Ohio State game comes down to a field goal. They either blow somebody out or, as we saw with Alabama, they get blown out. But I don't. I just cracked myself up there. I don't worry too much about that. I think again, it's not an offense where you worry a whole lot about kicking a lot of field goals, and they haven't had a lot of games that came down to that, to be honest with you, in the last 10 years. So I think he'll be fine. He'll probably hit 60, 70%. If that's what he hits, that's what he hits, and that's fine.
I'm trying to think of the last time an Ohio State game did go down to a field goal that Ohio State was kicking, not the Michigan State example from 15, but the last time that the Buckeyes had to make a kick to win or lose.
The first one that jumps out to me is 2004 against Marshall, but there has to be something more recent.
There was a Purdue one in there.
Yeah, Purdue, Iowa
in 2009.
under Tressel.
Yeah, I certainly remember, or maybe it was a block point after or something. I just remember being down on the field, and it was supposed to be automatic, and I turned my back to it, and you hear foot meet leather and hand meet leather, and then you're like, oh, what the hell just happened here?
They kicked a bunch of them against NC State, one of those 2 times. But, yeah, that's been a long time ago.
That's not to say it's not important. I think special teams are very important. Kickoff coverage is probably less important today. If you put the ball in the end zone or hit a pop-up inside the 10-yard line, they're going to be more inclined to fair catch that and move it out to the 25-yard line. And I think the kickoff team is just fine with that. If you start on your 25, that's good starting position for them on defense. So again, I don't want to minimize special teams. I think punt coverage is as important now as it's ever been, pinning teams back. If you don't score or kick a field goal, pin them back inside their 10-yard line and make them go 80 or 90 yards. So to me, it's maybe a different emphasis on special teams today than it's been in previous years.
Well, go back and I'll jump in real quick, Kevin. You go back and look, they barely attempt more than one a game in terms of field goals. So
yeah.
It's like 2016 or something. They were 1.5 a game. And so it's not, it is important, but Ryan Day isn't a huge fan of them anyway, in terms of field goals. Like Urban Meyer wasn't, but he kicked more than Ryan Day. I think Ohio State's more aggressive under Day. I was more concerned about the punting than the field goal kicking, just because the punting it happens 5, 6, 7 times a game as opposed to a kickoff or a field goal.
That was the point I was going to make. I mean, if everything goes right and you play your 12 league game, or you play your 12 regular season games, a conference championship game, and 2 playoff games, you have 15 games. If we're not going to see into the 20s in field goal attempts, I mean, and if we do, something horribly went wrong along the way. You're going to see a lot more punts along the way. I think in a lot of instances, though, just the lack of urgency on how special teams were set up for the spring game, when you're kind of going one-on-one, you're just kicking it out there. Maybe once the adrenaline gets flowing or whatever, Ohio State going back to the Australian football, Australian rules football pipeline, Pro Kick Australia, to bring in Jesse Mirko. I think he'll get it figured out, but as Tony said, that's going to be something that's going to be a lot more critical in terms of just game in and game out situations. Sure, there might be a field goal that is of significance at some point, maybe more so for the gamblers than anything, but I don't think that it's ever really going to be an instance of where Ohio State's going to need to pull one out unless we're really getting into the college football playoffs and Ohio State is equal talent with its opponent, because within the confines of the regular season, not a lot of teams that Ohio State's going to draw that are going to be within the same zip code as them in terms of talent.
I did see something that I liked from the special teams, just a new idea. Ryan Day with the kickoffs, it was one-on-one. It was the kicker kicking to the returner with no blocking, no tackling. And I thought, let's do that. Let's just have one-on-one kickoff returns. And then you'd start putting guys out there like Antoine Winfield as your kicker or Andy Katzenmoyer as your kicker. And then, just see what happens with both of those guys getting 30 yards of room to run and see if they can bring those guys down. Because I know Antoine Winfield could.
I think we're discounting the field goals a bit too much here, considering that had they hit 10 more against Alabama, they could have won that game. They might have had to kick them from 70 yards, but they could have won that game. So.
They would have needed 10 more field goals. That kind of gives you an idea how bad they got blown out.
But you're right.
I think Alabama could have put up probably 28 more points. So then they would have had to kick another 10 field goals.
But they do rely on the field goals too much in the postseason. I think that's been clear over the last couple of years. And I wouldn't be surprised if like a quarter of their field goals this season come from the playoffs.
Playoffs?
Playoffs, yes, Jim.
Playoff?
Ohio State football talk here each and every Wednesday. We typically do it at 2 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. Tony Gerdeman, Buckeye Scoop, Steve Hillwagon from Bucknuts, and Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove. David Greenshield has hit me with this a few times, so I will pass this one on. He's high on the wide receivers, and why not? He has pinned me to the wall on this is the best wide receiver group in the country, right, Mark? And I've said, let me look it over. I believe it is. He really liked Ted Ginn, Antonio Holmes, and Anthony Gonzalez, but this group is much deeper. Tony?
Well, it's deeper. That 05 group also had Brian Hartline as a true freshman. I think Robisky maybe as a true freshman. Devin Lyons, Albert Dukes as well. David was forgetting those guys.
The Dukes.
It was the Dukes. It was the Dukes.
But yeah, it's deeper than that group. And you even like Olave and Wilson have already bested Ginn and Holmes in terms of numbers. What they did last year in 8 games is basically what Ginn and Holmes would do in 13 or 14 under Tressel. That's a really good group, but I think you're talking about an OSU receiver room right now that could legitimately have 7 guys that could play anywhere, certainly in the Big Ten and anywhere else in the country, and be in that lineup. And so it's going to be up to Brian Hartline to get those guys all playing time this year. But I think it's too early or maybe irresponsible to say it's the best in OSU history. But I don't think anybody will be surprised if it is the best in OSU history this year, and especially moving Jackson Smith and Jigba into the slot. Since Urban Meyer arrived in 2012, that position has produced like 54 catches a year, the starter. And so you're talking if Jackson Smith and Jigba gets 54, you've got Olave with 60 or 70, Garrett Wilson with 60 or 70, and then Jamison Williams and Marvin Harrison Jr. and all of these other guys that are talented in their own right. So it would be irresponsible to say it's the best ever. So I'll leave it up to somebody else to say that, but I will then agree with them.
It's the best ever.
I agree.
But we're in a different era right now. When we sit there and we looked at that brief hiccup where they had a quarterback in Troy Smith who was proficient with the downfield pass and everything else, and then went back into I don't know, some Michigan type of offense where they couldn't throw the ball or do. I mean, it's very different now to where year in and year out you're able to bring in these quarterbacks that are able to do so many things, and that's what allows you to be able to put these types of receiver rooms together. I mean, I'm not taking anything away from Brian Hartline, Ryan Day, whatever, but you need to have the quarterbacks there. And I'm not going to pick on any specific quarterback of the past, but if you're a 5-star receiver and you are around the time of the clown show offense where 14 receptions led the team, that's kind of a waste of your talents or whatnot. But now Ohio State's able to sit there and be able to point to a Justin Fields, point to Dwayne Haskins, et cetera, and say these are the type of numbers we can put up. And that certainly makes Ohio State a much more attractive destination when they're going out and getting the Marvin Harrison Jr.'s of the world or the Emeka Egbukas or guys like that. And then it's just going to continue on here in 22 and 23 where they have Caleb Burton out of Texas, and they've got Keon Gray's out of Arizona, and they're already looking like they're going to start probably lining up what's going to be a pretty good receiver class in 23. So, we can sit here and talk about Olave and Wilson, but, we could be doing, Ohio State Buckeyes edition 204 here a couple years from now, and that at that moment in time, that might be the best receiver class just because of you have Harrison and Egbuka who are older. You have some of these other guys, and they just continue growing from there.
Let's not forget about the 2015 team that Michael Thomas, Jalen Marshall, Braxton Miller, Curtis Samuel, Dontre Wilson, Corey Smith, even guys like Johnny Dixon and Paris Campbell and Terry McLaurin who weren't doing anything yet. But that's 6 NFL guys right there in that room. Now, they weren't that yet, and they weren't as productive as I think these guys will be, like in terms of there's more guys that can be called upon and put in that rotation. 2014 team had 6 guys in the rotation. They all played, and that was a really good group too, with Devin Smith and Evan Spencer in that group, even though Evan Spencer I think had like 9 or 14 catches that year, but still a good group. But I think these guys overall are going to produce. You'll be able to ask more from more of them this year.
I would tap the brakes on best ever. I think, first of all, you have young quarterbacks throwing them the football, so they may not necessarily reach their fruition or their greatest amount of catches or whatever. They'll probably do pretty well. But I think that, again, what we saw on Saturday, this wasn't Harrison and Egbuka going out there against Jeffrey Okudah and Sean Wade and Kendall Sheffield and, NFL cornerbacks. This was against guys, their age or a year older who were just trying to learn their position too, for the most part. So, tap the brakes a little bit. Polish, yes. Marvin Harrison, very polished. Emeka Egbuka, yes, looks like he belongs and could make a tremendous difference this year. Smith-Njigba, yes, looks like he's improved from the little glimpses that we saw last season. Jameson Williams, to me, somewhat still of an enigma. First play of the game, ball goes right off his hands. Now, it may have been a little behind him from Jack Miller. I'd have to go back and watch it with a forensic microscope to see where the ball was placed and everything. From our vantage point, 20 stories in the air, it's kind of hard to tell exactly what's going on down there, even with binoculars. But I need to see more out of him. I need to see more consistency before I proclaim or declare him anything at this point. And I think Smith-Njigba's moved by him for the number 3 wide receiver spot if you put him on a totem pole and rank them 1 through 6 or 8 or whatever. So I think he's got the potential still to be part of this. I mean, deep ball against Clemson, the kid can play, but he's got to do it on an every game, every play basis. And I don't think we've seen that yet. Some of that's youth. And again, you got a complete X factor here with Julian Fleming. If he gets healthy and is able to get back in there in the fall, what does he add to this group? And now they're more than 5 or 6 deep. They could be 7 deep. So I want to see which direction it takes and get him healthy. According to them, they said he's never been healthy since he got to Ohio State a year ago. So, hopefully they can get him rehabbed and get him ready to go for the fall.
I just want to, I understand what Steve's saying about tapping the brakes, but, I think that Ohio State doesn't necessarily, unless you're Olave or Wilson, they don't throw a lot of 50-50 balls or whatever. So much of their offense is these short throws and, yards after catch or whatever. And I think that you're going to see Harrison and you're going to see Ibuka as guys that are going to be able, if given the opportunity, which I think they'll get some opportunity to be able to to do that. So it's going to be more important for them to sit there and make sure that they understand that they're running good routes, they understand levels and things of that nature. But, I can understand not wanting here in April to get so far in advance and saying that this is going to be the class, but I really have a hard time getting away from it. I know that over at Buckeye Grove, one of our writers wrote a piece about where does this receiver room sit all time, and it really got me thinking about it. And I put a couple hours in really looking at the classes, and barring a complete meltdown, barring just major underperformance at the quarterback position, I think we're going to see just some production numbers that are going to be hard to beat.
Ibuka, for me, made the catch of the day. When you think about all the momentum going toward the slant or the skinny post route, and all of a sudden he spins his body and he's like halfway on the ground and he's stretching out completely the other direction and making that catch. And as Steve said, he and Harrison both looked the part, and Harrison even more so to me looks the part, physically looks like he's a junior. And I don't remember who he was matched up with down near the goal line. And he will face tougher corners, but still it looked like it was just like he's just going to block somebody out and be able to do whatever he wants from not just a skill standpoint, but from his frame already. Usually those guys really need to hit the weights, but Benjamin Victor. But for Harrison, man, he looks good.
Well, and that touchdown pass, I want to go back to that real quick because that also incorporates something I liked about C.J. Stroud. And I tweeted this out the other day. Before that play, like as that play is lining up, C.J. Stroud goes and talks to Joe Royer, the tight end on the left side, and just easy. He's like goes up, walks up, talks to him, then gets back to get the snap, takes a snap, and is looking Joe Royer's way, freezes the linebackers, and then comes back and throws that slant to Marvin Harrison. And had he not frozen the linebackers and kept it's Kayvon Pope who is he gets drawn back inside and then the throw goes outside of him and he can't get back there. So when we're talking about earlier in the show, who has the best command of the offense, to me that was a significant play, and maybe just simple in terms of the quarterbacking, and every quarterback does it, but it stood out to me there. And then Marvin Harrison, nobody touched him on that one. I mean, he got off the line so easily. And he's just really, really smooth. I've said this before other places. He reminds me of Justin Ross his freshman year at Clemson. I'm not saying he's going to catch 1,000 yards, but he's just a big, long receiver, smooth at what he does. I don't know if he's going to be much of a deep threat like Justin Ross was early in his career, but we did see him get open deep in this one. I think Kyle McCord underthrew him. There's just a lot he can do. And he only averaged 7 yards a catch in the spring game, but it was more significant than that. It was the way he did it and just how easily and effortlessly. And as you said, he totally looks the part. He's 6'4", 205, 210, somewhere in there. And, you mentioned Ben Victor. It just the years of maybe with another year in the weight room and he'll be able to do it. And I don't think he ever looked any different than he did from day one.
Give him one more year.
210 pounds is 1.5 Ben Victors. I mean, because he just never was able to fill that frame out or whatever. And again, that didn't exclude him from making plays. I mean, I think that touchdown he had at Penn State over the middle, and he's still running, on that one. Well, that is probably one of the most underrated huge touchdowns in the last 20 years in Ohio State history.
Yep.
But, I think that everybody, when they saw him coming out of Coconut Creek, Florida, thought he was going to put on 25, 30 pounds, maintain the speed, and it just, never really happened. He still made the plays, but, he never really quite realized the potential that everybody thought was there.
Kevin, how would we describe him? He was like a baby deer
taking his first step, sort of like a freshman LaQuinton Ross out there in basketball or whatever.
Yeah.
Just a little timid, not quite sure, a little wobbly in the knees.
Little wobbly.
Ben Victor was running sprints, I guess, in the weight room. Nobody told him that he needed to be actually hitting the weights. It's about the details. All right, DJ, we got to you here. So he posted this question a number of times. Why is it that the lack of successful pro quarterbacks at Ohio State is a narrative as opposed to, except for Joe Burrow, of course, who played at LSU, started at Ohio State, as opposed to the lack of quarterback success before Burrow at LSU?
Well, LaMarcus Russell goes back over a decade, doesn't he? I mean,
Yes.
And probably 3 coaching staffs or 2 coaching staffs with the Mad Hatter or whatever ago. So I don't think one has anything to do with the other. I think the quarterbacks that you think about with Ohio State, with Troy Smith, and he had a cup of coffee in the NFL. Terrell Pryor, Braxton Miller were not NFL quarterback. So they were good college quarterbacks. Same really with JT Barrett. I think finally with Dwayne Haskins, Cardale Jones, you had guys that could fit into a pro-style offense and play at the NFL level. Cardale, disconnect, whatever it is. The foolishness with Haskins last year kind of, took him out of his first job opportunity there with the Redskins. But, maybe now he'll get another shot. So it's been a long time. Ohio State hasn't had anybody. I mean, Mike Tomczak from the mid-1980s, was basically it. Bobby Hoying had a couple good seasons, in the mid to late 90s, but that's about it. So there really haven't been many guys. Kent Graham played 1 year at OSU and then was in the NFL about 10 years, but people don't really think about him as an Ohio State guy and never really did anything in the NFL other than he was the quarterback of the Giants, it seemed, for 6-7 years or something, or he banged around for that long. So I don't know. I don't worry about it. I mean, it's just not something that you worry about too much. I mean, if you're winning at the level Ohio State is, you've got a tried and true formula. You're not going to deviate a whole lot from it. Now, obviously, Haskins and Fields are a little bit different in what they brought to the table than some of the guys that I mentioned earlier, like Miller and Pryor. They had so much more ability to execute a sophisticated passing game, and so take it for whatever it is. But I'm a believer that they're getting the right guys, it seems to me, to play at Ohio State. Ryan Day's offense, to have him sit up there in a chalk talk and try and explain it, as we sat through one time at one of his clinics there a year or two ago, it just your eyes just kind of glaze over. I don't know how that the players internalize everything that's going on with that offense. So it's pretty intricate. So if Fields was able to flourish in that offense, I think he'll be just fine in the NFL. So, start a new tradition. Ohio State's going to become quarterback U. And if Justin Fields is example one, then so be it.
Well, and that is one of Ryan Day's goals, is to make Ohio State a quarterback U. And I think this question is kind of in relation to the criticism that Justin Fields is getting, and it being based on the fact that Ohio State has never produced a great NFL quarterback, so why would they start now with him? And I asked the same question about Alabama. Like, Miami was already looking to maybe move on from Tua, and nobody ever talks about Alabama's lack of quarterbacks being drafted, and you'd have to go all the way back to like Joe Namath for their last, really successful quarterback who has no bearing on football today, but Ohio State moves the needle. So, anytime if a Buckeye fan is like, well, why do they talk about Ohio State? It's like, because people listen, and people like to talk about Ohio State. I mean, Justin Fields is the best topic that Mike Greenberg could ever have for his show Get Up. I mean, they talk about him as much as possible, and people watch it, and he moves the needle. And any way you can bring him up, Justin Fields, in any kind of conversation in terms of television or podcasts or radio is good. And if it's about criticizing Ohio State, all the better.
Let's not forget Richard Todd. Now that has bearing on, certainly that brings us up to about 1975.
Yes.
So
I'm wrong. Thanks, Mark. Yes, that's.
I just like throwing out old names. So any opportunity I can do that, I jump in with that. Mike Tomczak would be the best quarterback in the history of the program at the NFL level, right? He's the guy.
I mean, he played for 12, 14, 15 years. Tom Chupa.
And he started for the Bears. He started for the Bears, and they went to the playoffs when he played. He didn't put up crazy numbers, but he handed the ball off and threw swing passes to Walter Payton.
Started at times for the Steelers as well.
Yeah, he did. His I think his quarterback record is pretty darn good in the NFL.
Craig Krenzel is 3-2 all time as a starter. Probably the only starting quarterback in Chicago Bears history with a winning record, possibly, other than maybe Jim McMahon.
Well, think about all the fictitious quarterbacks, the Shane Falcons of the world, and everything else that have been. I mean, Ohio State's got that on lockdown or whatever. So,
lost me on that one.
Sorry, I don't mean to turn this into a pop culture hour.
To answer Garrett George's question, it's Paris Campbell and Michael Jenkins.
I knew it was Michael Jenkins. Okay, Paris Campbell. Very good.
Yeah, it was a very quiet 1,000. What was it, like 1,000 and like 1,050, something like that? I mean, he didn't quite get to 1,100 for Paris.
But for a Jim Tressel offense, Michael Jenkins, pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
You know who I thought was going to be a great Ohio State receiver was Chris Vance.
He was okay.
I mean, he was a JUCO guy, so he only had a couple of years. But, I remember, I think it was the spring game where he showed up. He had just had an incredible catch, in the back of the end zone or something. And he came in with the nickname of Spider-Man. And he immediately lived up to that the first time fans got to see him. And then it's like, oh, man, this guy. And then, of course, he only does – how much can you do when your quarterbacks are like Justin Zwick and Troy Smith early on in your career and stuff like that?
Well, there certainly were a lot of receivers with promise that came in. I mean, I remember how excited everybody was with Torian Washington. I mean, you just had guys who would come in, and I think in a lot of ways they were just victim of circumstance of where the offense was. I mean, when you had some of the bruising backs that Ohio State had, and just a lot of clock control that was going on, I think it just wasn't a lot of opportunity to be able to at least attempt to live up to the expectations that were placed on you by all of the recruiting services.
We talked earlier about wrong place, wrong time. Maybe the greatest victim of circumstance in Ohio State history is Joey Galloway, because of who his quarterbacks were and who they could have been if he had just been a couple of years later, playing with Terry Glenn and Bobby Hoying, or Demetrius Stanley and David Boston and Joe Germain. If he was just born a few years later, he was just born too soon for the football that he was born into, which is unfortunate because you put him in any offense today and look out.
Mike Tomczak started 74 games in the NFL. 73 games, 42-31.
Wow.
Winning record by 11 games.
He had good defenses.
He did have good defenses. Both stops. I don't know what this is telling us, Steve. Well, actually, sadly, I do know what it's telling us because this is only being asked of Steve and I. Did we watch Art Schleicher play in high school? First of all, I don't watch high school football. Even when I was 6 years old, I didn't watch it. So I covered it for 3 years. But besides that, doing play-by-play.
Yeah. I would have been he was a senior in the fall of 1977 at Miami Trace High School, and that was in the old I think they've revived it since then. The South Central Ohio League is back now with a lot of those schools down that way: Washington Courthouse, Wilmington, Miami Trace, Greenfield, Hillsborough, Madison Plains, whoever. And Circleville, my hometown, was in that league. And So they're playing Circleville, and it's the fall of '77, and he's going to Ohio State. I don't know back then what the timeline was. Probably didn't announce that till after the season or when he was getting ready to sign his letter of intent, a few months later. But they're beating Circleville, and they score a touchdown at the end of the game, and the backup scored, and that made the score 78-0. And they told the backups when they went out to do the extra point that under no circumstance were they to score, because they were the class of '78 and they wanted to win the game against Circleville, which was one of their top rivals in this league, 78-0. And that was the final score, 78-0. Arch Leister and Miami Trace beat Circleville. I think it was at Circleville, and I think I was at the game that night. And then, of course, obviously comes into Ohio State and has a 4-year run with the Buckeyes and brought him kind of out of the Stone Age. And obviously, Woody Hayes was only his coach for the first year and resigned, got fired after that Gator Bowl loss in '78. But then you have Earl Bruce and Glenn Mason, and they bring in some modern concepts, and obviously help to have Gary Williams, as his receiver, and some different things going forward. Doug Donnelly obviously was part of that renaissance, and Ohio State came out of the dark ages and still ran the ball effectively, but became kind of an offense that could beat you both ways, and in many ways brought Ohio State out of those dark ages.
The only thing that annoyed me about that, which was great to see Ohio State open it up, start throwing the football downfield, was every play had to be a play action, where the quarterback was Schleicher. It's 3rd and 17, and they're doing the fake dive to the fullback, and he's got to turn his back to the defense,
and it takes
like
so he loses
12
the defense
steps to set up. Yeah,
it's ridiculous.
It's like, okay, everybody knows you're passing. Just drop back.
Third and 15, the quarterback would fake a handoff and turn his back to the line of scrimmage. 3rd and 15. It was the most ridiculous thing in the world. Imagine doing that today with Twitter and message boards. I mean, they'd be, fried to death. I mean, the games get picked apart nowadays, but that was something nobody could understand. And, they kept that going for really until almost, it was toward the end of Earl's tenure that they finally, but I can still see Tom Tupa doing it. Same thing.
Yeah.
And in like 86 or 87, and Carsado, same thing. So I don't know. They believed in it, and it did freeze the linebackers for a minute, but, I don't know. Didn't make any sense.
Well, I remember talking to Jim Bowman about why they would do it sometimes on 3rd downs. He's like, well, it's also just a timing thing. You got to do something while the receivers are running deep enough to get where they're going. So, why not just fake it to the running back, and maybe somebody will buy it, but not on 3rd and 14.
No.
So do we expect, since we've been shut down with this pandemic, dead period until June 1st, campus is going to be then open. First of all, I haven't seen it statistically confirmed, but have there been less commits during this time because of the pandemic than there normally would be? Therefore, if there is, and I guess Kevin would be the best to address this, I would think, would we expect there to be more commitments during the summer after all these weekend visits?
Things are going to go nuts.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Things are going to go insane. And I still think that a lot of the commitments that you see out there right now, I think you could see a lot of movement. Maybe not as much of people leaving Ohio State or Alabama's classes or whatever, but it certainly would not surprise me to see some kids who have committed to what you would sit there and say are lesser programs or whatnot and gotten their placeholder commitment in place. They can go out and do some camps. Ohio State just announced its camp dates. I just saw Larry Johnson put a tweet out. You get these kids out there and they start getting noticed by other programs. They could move around. I guarantee you there are a lot of programs out there with certain kids that are like, we really need to see you. We know things are going to be opening up. I know for a fact kids have tried to commit to programs and have been told to wait. So we're going to see absolute craziness. And I have a feeling that the June shows probably will all have some pretty substantial recruiting segments in it, because I expect a lot of news to start happening with that first visit weekend, the weekend of the 4th and 5th of June.
And that transfer portal was really humming right after the season for 6 or 8 weeks. It's died down. Now that guys have seen where they stand on the depth chart, can we expect that also to get kicked back into gear with guys seeing, okay, I'm not necessarily in as good a place as I thought I was?
Definitely. That's where this starts to happen. It'll happen at Ohio State. It'll happen all over the nation as position coaches and head coaches start talking to their players about where they are. Like every player, it's not like an exit interview. It's more of like this is your quarterly review interview type of thing, and players will get told like, well, right, this is how we have you. I see these 3 guys in front of you. This is what you'd have to do to make up ground, or it's going to be really hard for you to play here. It's going to be really hard for you to make up ground. And so they have these honest conversations. And Ryan Day has said that the reason they're difficult conversations, but they're also not because they're honest with the players. They keep them up to speed throughout the course of practicing and camps and just every day, daily. The players kind of know where they stand. They certainly know how they're playing. And so when you have these uncomfortable conversations, it's not out of the blue. So that also alleviates things, makes things easier. Plus, I don't think Day or his staff has ever stopped a player from transferring and being eligible that same year. So they also will go to bat for players who want to play elsewhere. And so, you're going to see that at Ohio State. I don't know. They've already – Max Ray, the offensive tackle, went into the portal during spring. You know, how many more? 4, 5, 6, 3? I mean, somewhere in that range. It's not going to be none, that's for sure.
Yeah, I was going to bring up Ray. We haven't heard yet where he's going to go, but probably somewhere closer back home in Tennessee or wherever. But the other thing is, and I know this because I've got son and daughter who are going to graduate on May 9th, which is Mother's Day. They're going to have their graduation at Ohio Stadium. I think this is the last week for full classes, and then they go into exams after that. So when the exams are completed and the grades are posted, that's when you'll see maybe 1, 2, 3 guys say, "Hey, I'm done with Coach Mick. I'm not going in there to screw around with him anymore. If I'm not going to play here, I'm moving on." So, it'd be pointless to go in there and lift weights and run if don't see a future at Ohio State. So that's the timing element of it. Probably about the first week of May or thereabouts. That once the exams are done, the grades are posted, you got your transcript, and you're a free agent. So you can, move on and go pursue something else. And I wouldn't think that maybe 1 to 3 guys would be in that boat, but I wouldn't look for many more. And as far as a weakness on this roster, there's been talk about them getting the linebacker from Tennessee. I'm not sure if any closure ever came to that, but given the state of the linebacker group and where things are at right now, maybe that's still a possibility of an incoming transfer, that kid or somebody else at some point.
Yeah, with Henry To'oTo'o, just kind of waiting to see. I mean, there was some rumors that he was going to try and take some April visits that have now kind of bled into May or whatnot. I think they're waiting to see if now that there's the one-time transfer that's in place, but conferences still can kind of supersede it and not allow you to do it within conference. Does the SEC come on board with that? Does that allow a potential transfer from Tennessee to Alabama? Because a lot of people put To'oTo'o to Alabama. I still like Ohio State's chances there. I kind of agree with the guys in saying, 1 to 3 guys potentially could transfer out to look for an opportunity. I've heard, maybe we might even see a medical retirement along the way. I think we'll see a couple of names move on one way or another. But yeah, you have to be honest with these players. And I think that's, you use that moving forward, because if you just sit there and you start jerking these kids around and you're not honest with them, I guarantee you it ends up getting out there in terms of you trying to recruit kids in the future. So, I would much rather have these quote unquote difficult conversations and keep a roster full of motivated guys who are all, working for the same thing rather than just trying to keep your numbers high, even if it's just guys that are just kind of around who just don't really seem to have any sort of path to the field.
Ohio State Buckeyes live every Wednesday at 2:00 Eastern Time. Appreciate, of course, the time, the insight, the expertise from these three: Steve Hellwagon, Bucknuts, Tony Gerdeman from Buckeye Scoop, and Kevin Noon from Buckeye Grove. All right, guys, appreciate it. You guys have a great rest of your week, and hopefully we can make it happen next Wednesday.
Sounds good.
Take care.